Welcome everyone to a look at the SingularityComputers test bench. Now we've used test benches heavily for a long time and we have a few around the workshop here now. We're using them every day. I've used them for my own personal rigs for I think about 2 years. I was running a test bench at one point because I was just constantly upgrading. And the problems that I've always had with them is, first of all, the cable mess. There is no cable management in test benches, really. So you just have a huge jumbled mess of cables, like a big bundle somewhere. And even if you do all custom cables for a test bench, which is really quite annoying because you have an open design and then you have to go spend a whole lot on making custom cables that are the correct length for those particular components, but then it's a test bench, so then you're going to be changing around the components and then you got to do more custom cables. So yeah, we ended up just using stock PSU cables and just having a huge mess of cables next to all of our test benches, and it just takes up a lot of space. It looks terrible and it gets in the way and it's difficult to use. So ever since we came up with the idea of the power board, we've been wanting to make a test bench with a power board because the power board solves cable mess and cable management because it has short, clean cables and it standardizes all of the cable lengths. We also wanted something that was nice and sturdy, so this has a big, thick 3mm folded aluminium frame, so you just never have to worry about the strength of it. It's got a really thick tray underneath it, because this is another problem that we've had with test benches. A lot of them are flimsy and not really designed for water cooling. Like once you put a radiator on it, it's kind of wobbling around. And after you use them a lot, which we do because we're using them every day, they start to wear out quite quickly and you start to have issues with them. And that is the other thing. The water cooling compatibility on test benches is pretty bad. Like the most you can fit is I think a 360mm radiator, but they're kind of really tacked on somewhere that's in the way. And there's not space for other water cooling components. So that's something else that we wanted to solve with this. So you can install up to 2 560mm radiators on the sides here, although they will overhang a bit. 280 is optimal. It's the same width as the test bench, but you can do 120 or 140 wide radiators on both sides. And then if you wanted to do an external water cooling system like an arterial water box, you also have the pass-throughs on the back. And for me, that would be the ideal setup, because then you could just have fans around where you wanted them. You can mount 120 or 140mm fans. You can also mount 3 140mm fans on the front, a couple more on the other side. You wouldn't do all of those, but you'd position fans where you needed them for your test setup or build that you're doing. And then you would have quick disconnects on the back here, and it can be for dual loops and an arterial somewhere else. And then you can just connect and disconnect that whenever you want to. I'd probably have quick disconnects on the inside as well, so that you can swap out the CPU water block, take the motherboard out, swap out the GPUs, whatever you need to do. But then, yeah, you can also just go with air cooling, and I can't show you because there's a lot of secrets around here, but currently we are just running air cooling on our test bench that we're using for testing just over to the left of me. So yeah, just having a look around, we have some cutouts here for cable routing. There's a lot of space under the test bench if you wanted to, like between the power board and the base, if you wanted to run anything through there. Although you don't really need to, because the power board has everything nicely positioned around it. Yeah, the water cooling pass-through is here, power supply mounts over here, 7 expansion slots. And it may look like the radiators would kind of flex a bit mounted on the sides, but actually it all gets a lot stiffer once you install the radiators. And this material is so thick that it's very strong. We also have an optional distribution plate which mounts onto the front, and it has a nice clean layout so that you can run the connections in and out of the radiators, which mount onto the sides, either on the inside or the outside, depending on the length of the radiators that you are using. D5 reservoir distribution plate, so the reservoir is there. D5 mounts on the outside so it doesn't cramp up the inside. And let's take a look at the power board. So the way the power board works you have the input connections here, so the power supply is here, and we make custom cable kits for any power supply. So on our website, when you're ordering one of these cable kits, you input your power supply type and we will make a nice short black sleeved cable kit which looks like these cables, specifically for your power supply to connect to any of our power boards. And we have to do it that way and sell those ones separately because PSUs do not have standard pinouts. They're all different, and that is something that's a little bit frustrating about all of this, but we're working towards other solutions for that problem. But then with every power board product, you receive the cables which go from the power board to the components. So that's what we have here, 24-pin linking cable. So when it comes to actually plugging these in, you just, click like that, and then you've got a nice, clean, short cable. So there's no cable mess at all. And there's also no cable management to do. You don't need to hide or tie anything back. So these are the EPS cables. This is the 12VH, and you can select between 12VH and PCIe. So yeah, over here we have 4 8-pin PCIe inputs, 2 8-pin EPS, and a 24-pin. And then for the outputs, we have 2 EPS here and 2 here. These are just for different motherboard layouts. It's not for using it all at the same time. 24 pins, 6 and 8 pins supplementary because different motherboards need 6 pins, some need 8 pin. We have a 4-pin ATX here, which is actually for the pumps. And we have an adapter cable which comes with the distribution plate, which adapts this to 2 times Molex and 2 times SATA. We have 2 12VH power here, and you'll notice we don't have 12VH power inputs, and that is because the power board actually converts the 8-pin PCIe to 12VH power, full 600 watts, not limited. And the power board actually pulls the ground and 12 volt, so the 12VH are pulling from, all of the ground and 12 volt. We have 4 8-pin PCIe here, and yeah, you can see the motherboard mounts directly to the power board here. We have a 140mm fan mount here for the back of the CPU socket to blow air onto the back of the CPU, and this can also be used to access the CPU backplates, CPU cooler backplates. So now onto the hubs. We have 4 PWM zones, 2 for fans and 2 for pumps. So each fan zone has 4 PWM outputs. So there are 4 on this end and then 4 on this end. And then there's an input for each zone. So one of these are the PWM input. And then we have 2 zones for the pumps. So potential dual loop setup for the pumps. And then there's an input and output for each of the pumps. And then we have the same temperature-based RPM control that we've recently made a video on, which I'll link in the description. So that is why up here we have potentiometers. So this is for adjusting the RPM curves. So this is not like a manual fan controller where all you could do is just adjust the RPM. These are actually adjusting the RPM curves, the beginning of the curve. Now, that depends how you set it up. You can also just use these, so if you connect a temperature sensor, these are for adjusting the curve. If you don't, they're just adjusting the RPM like a old school fan controller. And then over here you can see we have a lot of switches, and this is for, well, a lot of different things. So I'll go from the top. So this is motherboard and power board control of the ARGB. What power board control means is you'll switch over to this here, which is for an upcoming device. So that won't work until you plug in that device. Motherboard is motherboard control of the ARGB. So the next one is temperature or motherboard control of the different PWM. So that applies to all of the different, there's a switch for each zone. And then you can switch between temperature sensor header 1 and 2 for all of the zones. And there are the temperature sensor inputs there. So this would come from like a G1/4 inch plug temperature sensor, which is running directly into your loop, so that you can have your coolant temperature controlling all of these zones, the fan curves, and then you can adjust the fan curves here. So I go into the benefits, well actually Dan, our PCB designer, goes into the benefits of this system in the other video, so I recommend checking that out. if you're interested in more info. And we don't have integrated ARGB LEDs on this power board because we definitely didn't think that was necessary. This is a completely practical test bench that just needs to work. It doesn't need to be pretty. Everything needs to be robust so that you can, you know, keep putting components in and out of it for many years and never have any issues with it. But then if you do want to do ARGB, we still have that over here. And we have 8 ARGB outputs. Over here we also have the power and reset button inputs, which go from the motherboard to the power board so that you can use the power and reset buttons. And yeah, we have included different linking cables, so PWM ×2 to go from the motherboard to the power board, and these are the linking cables for the power and reset buttons, which go from the motherboard to the power board. Some other features I should mention is the dedicated fan header over here for this fan for the rear CPU socket cooling. And we also have a PSU jump starter for just running the pumps. So if you flick this switch here, you can run the pumps on their own without booting the system. I think I've covered everything. There will be more videos coming up on the test bench and hopefully some builds as well. But you know, I think the main problems of test benches we have really tried to solve on this one, and I think that instead of it just being for testing, it could now be something that you could use for your own personal rig, build a really nice system into it. You know, the radiators on each side, it could all be symmetrical, super clean cables with no cable mess whatsoever. It could actually be a really nice looking rig. And then also very practical for air cooling, for external water cooling systems. There is a secret message on the test bench, and it is actually on all of our power boards. So I'd really like to see if people can find that and put that into the comments.